Vladimir Putin has wrapped himself in the language of destiny. He believes that history is swinging back towards Moscow, that energy leverage, Western fatigue, and battlefield gains will eventually force Ukraine to accept defeat. Was it Malcolm McDowell in the Star Trek film who says, "I have an appointment with destiny and I don't intend to miss it"? That is Putin, isn't it? This conviction underpins everything he does, from his public theatrics with Western envoys to his refusal to scale back demands. Yet it is a conviction built on misjudgment, hubris, and a structural inability to confront reality. A key element of Putin's worldview is the belief that Russia's enemies are collapsing. Washington is impatient to extricate itself from Ukraine. Republicans in Congress have demanded conditions on aid. Even the decision to send Kushner and Gwitkov to Moscow is read by the Kremlin not as diplomacy but as supplication. Russia has always equated negotiation with weakness, so the very existence of peace talks confirm Putin's belief that Russia holds the stronger hand. Europe, meanwhile, faces its own divisions. Efforts to unlock frozen Russian assets have been halted by the European Central Bank. Macron strikes a bold tone, yet French finances and political turbulence limit his options. EU leaders promise future gas bans, but Russia has already diversified. These contradictions feed Putin's narrative that the West blusters in public but buckles in private. On the battlefield, Russian troops have been advancing around Zaporizhia and have claimed most of Pokrovsk. Moscow's renewed drone and missile campaign is designed to freeze Ukrainian cities into submission. If Ukraine is forced into blackouts and driven into financial crisis, Putin believes morale will break before Russia's morale breaks. And at the moment, as Caelan Robertson points out, much of Kyiv is dark. The only lights are coming from personal generators, and yet beneath the bombast a remarkable truth is leaking through cracks in the Kremlin's narrative. For the first time, a high-ranking Russian commander has openly admitted what the world already knows. Russia was not prepared for this. Vladimir Cherkin, a former commander of the Russian ground forces, has stated plainly that Moscow underestimated Ukraine and overestimated itself. He pointed to the fantasy of seizing Kyiv in 3 days and spoke of a culture of self-deception, fueled by intelligence officers telling leaders what they wanted to hear. He even acknowledged the disastrous myth that most Ukrainians would welcome Russian troops as liberators. This is not Ukrainian propaganda. It's the verdict of a decorated Russian general. And this rare moment of honesty reveals a deeper problem. Overconfidence is not merely a political tactic, it is a structural flow baked into Putinism. Decision-making in Moscow is dominated by fear, flattery, and curated information. Generals who told the truth are sidelined. The result is a war launched on illusions, with soldiers sent into combat without proper training, logistics, or understanding of the country they are invading. 2.5 years later, casualties are catastrophic. Russian finances are bleeding, oil revenues are shrinking, the federal budget is heading deep into deficit. The Kremlin has had to squeeze taxes, raise pension reserves, and pursue risky shadow fleets to keep the world afloat, to keep the war afloat. A confident state doesn't hide its economic indicators or arrest businessmen for asking questions. Putin's swagger hides fragility. His regime depends on projecting inevitability. He must appear unstoppable to remain unchallenged. So he insists that Russia has barely begun to fight, or that this is not even a war, this is a surgical operation. The phrasing changes as circumstances worsen, but the narrative never shifts. Russia is destined to win because it is Russia, because it is bigger. There's a tragic circularity here. Because Putin must believe in triumph, he cannot acknowledge error. Because he cannot acknowledge error, he repeats error. Because he repeats error, he must cling even harder to the fantasy of destiny. Meanwhile, Ukraine, for all its suffering, remains free. 80% of the country rejects Russian rule. The spirit of national resistance that Putin dismissed is the very force preventing his supposed victory. The United States and Europe will have far greater economic power than Russia could ever wield. Internal unhappiness in Russia is quiet only because repression is loud. So, why does Putin still think time is on his side? Part of the answer is that authoritarian rulers often mistake silence for loyalty. Fear suppresses criticism, which then presides over the over the system and convinces the leader that there is no criticism to suppress. Churkin's remarks are so shocking precisely because they expose how much discontent has been smothered. If generals are whispering in interviews, you can be sure that they are shouting behind closed doors. Another part is Putin's personal psychology. He filters history through his own survival. The Soviet Union collapsed and humiliated Putin. The Chechen wars blooded him, but the patience he shows eventually delivered Crimea. He's convinced himself that resolve triumphs over reality. If Ukraine suffers longer than Russia, then Russia has won. This is the heart of the danger. Putin's confidence is not grounded in strength, but in a leader who cannot imagine that he might lose. That mindset has already produced one catastrophic miscalculation. It could yet produce worse. The next test is coming. Russian elites are watching the costs rise. Russian officers are watching casualties mount. Russian civilians are watching a war officially described as simple and temporary, an expansion into something existential and endless. None of this fits the story the Kremlin began with. Putin thinks destiny is on his side. History often punishes rulers who think that.